Honorable Donville Ennis, Minister of Health, Senator Harold Critchlow, Dean Emeritus, Mr. Harold Codrington, Deputy Governor, Central Bank of Barbados, Dr. Joy St. John, Chief Medical Officer, Mr. Patson Allen, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health, Dr. Anton Beth, Senior Medical Officer, also in the Ministry of Health, with responsibility for HIV management, Mr. Ian Austin, Head of the Open Campus, University of the West Indies, Mrs. Angela Nichols, mother of our distinguished speaker this afternoon. Indeed, a warm welcome to you, ma'am. Very special indeed. Dr. Wendy Seeley, former presenter with the Lunchtime Lecture Series. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure this afternoon to welcome all of you to this special series in our Lunchtime Lecture program. And just to remind some of you that our lecture series has been ongoing for almost 15 years. It has evolved over the years, and it's a lecture series that, in collaboration with the Open Campus of the University of the West Indies, formerly the School of Continuing Studies, was in fact established to bring some of the great knowledge and information from the University of the West Indies to the ordinary man in the streets. Today's discussion, of course, is a very interesting one, a topic that has excited me from the very beginning: HIV, sex, money, and rights. And as I look at this topic, I ask a few questions, as there can be numerous interpretations to the word sex. Well, we all know what that is. Money, is it money for sex? Or is it money paid to persons affected with HIV? What about this money? I'm eager to learn, Dr. Messiah. Rights, of course there are many rights involved. Is it the rights of the co-workers, of persons who have been affected? Is it the rights of the survivors of persons affected with HIV and so on? So our title certainly provokes great interest, and I'm eager to learn from our very special guest what his interpretations are. It is indeed my pleasure and privilege to ask the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Joy St. John, to introduce the Honorable Minister to say a few words at the start of this Lunchtime Lecture Series. I beg your pardon. It is indeed my pleasure to invite the Honorable Minister to say a few words at the very beginning. Mr. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Best. I'd be a little timid there and perhaps a little bit intimidating, wondering what the CMO would say she had to introduce me now. Particularly on the topic, HIV, money, sex, and rights. Senator Dean Critchlow, Deputy President of the Senate, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Barbados, Chair of the HIV/AIDS Commission, Reverend Dr. Nigel Taylor, of course, Dr. Carol Jacobs, and others from the Commission, Chief Medical Officer of Health, Chief Medical Officer Barbados, Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health, staff in the Ministry of Health, ladies and gentlemen, special invited guests, good afternoon to you. Now, it's with great pleasure that I warmly welcome you on this special occasion as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Lady Mead Reference Unit. As you are aware, the LRU, as is more commonly known, is a specialty clinic which was established for the multidisciplinary management of the people with HIV in Barbados. Today marks the date when this facility was first officially opened in 2002. It has been a beacon of hope to many persons in its quest to deliver high-quality medical care and supportive services over the past decade. In accordance with international best practice standards for the management of HIV, highly active antiretroviral therapy was introduced in 2002. And the use of such has led to significant reductions in the number of people becoming sick due to HIV and the number of people dying with AIDS in Barbados. It is noteworthy that recent studies have revealed that by using highly antiretroviral drugs, which suppresses the likelihood that people with HIV can transmit the virus, the annual rate of new cases of HIV in Barbados has declined. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore, the LRU has played a pivotal role in helping the National AIDS Program achieve its mandate of preventing and controlling HIV in Barbados. This unit, through its highly trained staff, also provides capacity building support for local and regional clinicians working in HIV by assisting with clinical training programs. The LRU is home not only to a clinic, but to a laboratory which conducts routine lab tests that are needed for the assessment and monitoring of people living with HIV. The LRU lab became internationally accredited in 2009 and re-accredited in 2011. It is the first and only lab of its nature in the English-speaking Caribbean to receive such an accolade. In addition to the capacity to process samples of CD4 and viral loads since 2002, the lab is presently able to conduct testing for chlamydia and gonorrhea, diagnosis for HIV amongst infants, testing for influenza, and molecular diagnostic testing for cancers. So obviously the LRU is doing great work. It is currently seeking to expand its testing portfolio to include HIV drug resistance testing, molecular testing for TB, and testing for HPV, the virus that causes cervical cancer. Ladies and gentlemen, the multi-million-dollar investment into the ultra-modern technologies employed at the Lady Mead Reference Unit Lab have yielded tremendous benefits to the wider health sector of Barbados. It should be noted that other countries in the region which lack the in-house capacity that we have in Barbados have been accessing the services of the LRU lab. All Barbadians should be proud of this facility, proud of the high-quality services that it offers, and proud of how it has contributed to our development by helping mitigate the impact of this public health predicament, HIV. Let me also add at this juncture that it's not just the lab, it's on the staff who work therein, but it's also through to the tireless effort of those who work with us in partnership in the HIV/AIDS Commission, notably, of course, Dr. Carol Jacobs and others, and now Dr. Nigel Taylor and the staff there, and all Barbadians who have taken this battle on board. It's through our collective efforts that we can boast of the success we've had to date. However, there is no room for us to rest on our laurels, and we must continue with that collaborative spirit to move this battle forward. At this juncture, I would like to extend a special welcome to our special guest speaker, Dr. Ernest Messiah, Director of UNAIDS Regional Support Team for the Caribbean, based in Trinidad. I would like to thank him for readily consenting to travel to Barbados and to be part of the 10th anniversary celebrations of the LRU. I must say, however, that we have a few mutual friends who always remind me that Ernest never misses opportunity to come to Barbados. I would also like to thank all of you in the audience for being here this afternoon as we seek to better understand the dynamics of the HIV epidemic so that collectively we can further address the issues related to it. Although my role here this afternoon is simply to welcome you, let me take this opportunity on behalf of the Ministry of Health to thank all of our collaborators, including the UWI Open Campus of Barbados and the Central Bank of Barbados for their eagerness in assisting this community lunchtime lecture on the topic HIV, money, sex, and rights. Once again, let me welcome each and every one of you, and I hope you have an enjoyable and informative experience. Thank you.
Now, on behalf of the Central Bank of Barbados and the Open Campus, I invite Dr. Joyce and John to introduce our special guest speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Master of Ceremonies. Honorable Donville Innes, Minister of Health, Senator Dean Harold Critchlow, Dean Emeritus and Deputy President of the Senate, Mr. Harold Codrington, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Mr. Ian Austin of the Open Campus of the University of the West Indies, immediate former and present chairs of the HIV Commission, Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Taylor, and I recognize many other trailblazers and fighters in this issue of HIV. Our distinguished speaker, Dr. Ernest Messiah. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Today, June 26, Lady Mead Reference Unit celebrates its 10th year of existence. This lecture is one in a series of activities being held during this month to mark the occasion. I would like to extend a sincere welcome to all of you joining us here today for this lecture. Today we are honored to have as our guest speaker Dr. Ernest Messiah. He brings to us a wealth of experience, having worked in the area of HIV/AIDS both regionally and internationally. At present, he is the director of the UNAIDS Caribbean Regional Support Team, which is based in Port of Spain, Trinidad. Prior to joining UNAIDS in 2012, Dr. Messiah was the head of the health section at the Commonwealth Secretariat in London, leading a health program that covered 4 subregions: Caribbean, Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. He started his career in the late 1980s, sorry for letting out about your age, at the CARICOM Secretariat. His involvement with HIV started with the first global program on AIDS, GPA, in the Caribbean. In 2006, he served as a special advisor to the CARICOM Pan-Caribbean Partnership Against HIV/AIDS, better known as PANCAP, to help coordinate its regional AIDS programs. Dr. Messiah worked for 5 years as a health specialist at the World Bank on the HIV/AIDS and population projects in West Africa and Latin America. He was involved in the development of some of the bank's first regional AIDS strategies. He also worked for over 10 years with the Inter-American Development Bank, IADB, in Washington, where he served as a lead advisor on HIV/AIDS and disability. He has worked extensively in Latin America and the Caribbean. Dr. Messiah received his education at the University of Waterloo in Canada, the London School of Economics, and at Johns Hopkins University, from where he obtained his doctorate in public health. The topic for the lecture this afternoon is HIV, money, sex, and rights. Dr. Messiah chose this topic, and I do believe that it is a fitting topic to heighten public awareness on these 3 parameters and their relation to the spread of HIV and AIDS. I am sure that you will agree with me that Dr. Messiah's wide experience aptly qualifies him to address this topic. I know that you will both learn and benefit from Dr. Messiah's discourse this afternoon, and that it will inform us about how we can move forward in our response to HIV and AIDS. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to convey our deep appreciation to Dr. Messiah for the valuable contribution he has made over the years. His commitment and involvement in coordinating HIV/AIDS programs, both regionally and internationally, has inspired others to take action and continue to put the issue of HIV/AIDS at the top of the development agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the podium Dr. Ernest Messiah. I am sure he will give us much food for thought in this lunchtime lecture.
Honorable Minister, I am deeply humbled by the invitation to speak here today. It is indeed a privilege to be here to speak. Dean Critchlow, my thanks to you extend in many, many realms. Thank you so much. For my friends and colleagues in the ministry, thank you for the opportunity to having worked with you for over these years and to share some thoughts with you today. And to the people who work at Lady Mead, for the work that you've done over the last 10 years, there is a lot of gratitude from all the people that you have served. Today, I also want to recognize the people who have been some of the founding fathers and mothers of the AIDS response. I see them in the audience. I see Tim Roach, whom I worked with over 10 years ago. I see Dr. Jacobs. I see my colleagues from the National Commission, Reverend Taylor. All of these people here have contributed to what is perhaps one of the most successful AIDS responses in the Caribbean, which is here in Barbados. But that response is for and fundamentally about people. So I am grateful to all of you for the work that you've done. And I'm also particularly grateful for the Central Bank for allowing me, and so I say to the Deputy Governor, thank you so much for the opportunity of being able to speak here today. Now, what I want to speak about is this. It is about a topic about money, rights, and sex. But as I hope you will see, one of the most difficult things that we have to confront when we speak about this topic is actually one that I am confronting right here on this stage. How do you speak about sex when your mother's in the audience? So, I say to my mother, thank you for coming because it helps illustrate some of the challenges we face when we speak about HIV/AIDS. And part of that challenge is how do parents speak to children, and also how do children speak to their parents. Mummy, hold on. But I want to tell a story. I want to tell a story about 4 people. There's a little boy called Dickaroon. His auntie called him that. I want to tell a story about a lady called Miriam. I want to tell a story about a friend of mine, Anthony. And I want to tell a story about someone I call niece. And you'll see why I call her niece. But let me start with the story about Dickaroon. There was a little boy once, and he had a hobby. He collected stamps. And one of the first stamps he got was this. It was really interesting. It was old. It went back to the Victorian era, and he liked the color. And on a map, he could find out where it was. And as he continued later on collecting stamps, he got new ones. Now, as you look at these, he only saw at the time that they were, in fact, just colorful and about countries. What he didn't understand until much later, when he looked at it, was how this could help him understand a lot about rights. Because as he looked at it as he grew older, what he saw there were printed over that colonial image, notions of independence. And then he also saw that some places, the 2 on the bottom, Barbados and Trinidad, had printed stamps that spoke to independence. But what was that about? What did independence mean? And how possibly, as he grew older, was there a relationship between the child's collection of stamps and HIV? So he did a bit of reading, and he looked back at what independence was supposed to be about. Now, he also too found out that it was much easier to find out what George Washington had said, and that most people in the Caribbean knew what the Americans or the Canadians or the British thought about nationhood. But what did Caribbean people think about it? And in the words of Eric Williams, his address to Trinidad and Tobago on the 31st of August 1962, roughly 50 years ago, one of the things that Eric Williams said, that our democracy should not be about a hollow mockery, a gigantic fraud. But he spoke to, as many of the leaders at that time did, about the need to ensure that there was not intolerance. But in 1962 and in 1966, what many of us were thinking about in terms of intolerance was that break from a colonial past where issues of race and creed became important. That was what it was about then. But then there were the other irrationalities. Eric Williams, great historian as he was, didn't name those irrationalities. He spoke about creed, he spoke about race, he spoke about class. But what HIV has actually done, in a lot of the stigma that comes up, it speaks to that other irrationality. That's what independence was about. Because I'm often told that human rights are foreign. They're foreign to the Caribbean. They're not about us. But you see, I was that little boy who collected those stamps. And when I looked back at them, I realized that it was not about stamps only, that there were messages on those stamps that I, as a child, could not have understood. But now, as a child of independence, I could understand what we were fighting for and how human rights were actually part and parcel of what Caribbean people are about what these societies were funded for. Human rights is not foreign. Human rights actually belongs to us. And the struggle for rights that started way before 1834, before emancipation, is a struggle that is part and parcel of the history of Caribbean people. Human rights belong to us. But we're often told that rights are vague. There are tangibles you get from human rights. They're tangibles when systems are changed that give people access to certain services. Tangibles that change the way we see ourselves. The bricks and mortar. An eminent jurist, Edwin Cameron, calls it the bricks and mortar that set up the foundations of a new society. And he speaks about it in the context of South Africa, of how certain rights cases that were taken before the Constitutional Court in South Africa on HIV/AIDS have laid a foundation upon which other changes can then come about. But the rights argument also, too, does something important. It's a game changer. The case of the Treatment Action Coalition in South Africa, which argued forcibly that the government of South Africa at the time needed to provide ARVs for pregnant mothers, was settled in the court. And in addition to allowing that 1.4 million women had access to nevirapine that could save the lives of their children, changed the fundamental arguments in South Africa about how the government's responsibility for its citizens concerning HIV should be viewed. So rights can change a wider environment than the thing that one is looking for. But the other thing, too, about rights is that it confers a sense of moral citizenship. So, what's moral citizenship? Moral citizenship comes up very much when we start looking at the three other people I want to introduce you to today. Because moral citizenship is about people not feeling that they can be disqualified from the society on the basis of characteristics that are part and parcel of them, that they feel that they have absolutely the right, as does every other citizen, to participate and to benefit. But if in this region you are part of what is called the vulnerable populations, you do not necessarily feel that right and that freedom to participate that is intrinsic to what independence was about. Gay men, men who have sex with women, commercial sex workers, people living with HIV don't necessarily always feel that they have the same rights, don't necessarily feel that they can participate in the same way, because in a lot of cases, there is stigma and there are legal frameworks that can scribe their ability to function in the society. This, to me, is a picture of the joy of moral citizenship. That's 1966. And the joy in that picture is about a prime minister leading a country and a people where everyone was going to be equal, where certain chains had been broken. That's what independence was about, the right for all. And the struggle for HIV/AIDS is about making sure that all people have access, and all people have access to rights. Now, I want to tell you about Miriam. But before I tell you about Miriam, let me tell you how as a little boy I learned about Miriam. Now, the Mighty Sparrow, I think, is one of the greatest bards of the region. His lyrics are classic. And I will say, not an attack to the younger generation, they don't know how to write like him. But this calypso here is one of the classics that as a little boy we all learned about. Jean and Dinah, Rosita and Clementina, round the corner waiting, bet your life is something they're selling. And if you catch them broken, you can get all for nothing. But what was that really about? What really was that about? Jean and Dinah was about sex workers. But what it did was that it gave an image of what sex workers were like. And it started to construct environments about sex work. It started to say how these women were. And these are verses that you don't often remember the words of. But the last line is really something. And I say, as it's often said, no, sparrow, no. By the sweat of thy brow thou shalt eat bread. No more hotel to rest your head. As a young boy, when I started thinking about sex work and learning about it, that's what educated me. Jean and Dinah, Rosita and Clementina. That was the image. But what happens with these images is that you don't really see the people behind them. You don't see that the sex workers in this region are men and women, primarily women. They are mothers, they are sisters, they're people, they're Caribbean citizens, and they have rights. That's Miriam Edwards. And as you see as she comes in, she moves from a shadow to a person, because to me, Miriam is a person. She's not a sex worker, she's a person, she's my friend. She's one of the bravest women in this region. She stands up for rights. And in 2010, when PANCAP, the Pan-Caribbean Partnership Against HIV, honored 4 people for their contributions to fighting HIV, one of them was Dr. Jacobs. One of them was Perry Gomez, who is now Minister of Health in the Bahamas. And the other was Peter Figueroa from the University of the West Indies. The fourth was Miriam Edwards. She had stood up and fought for the rights of sex workers. But what does she face? She faces stigma. But it was interesting looking back in the law to see where some of this came from. That's the Vagrancy Act of 1824, pre-emancipation. And that act was created at the time after the Napoleonic Wars, when there were lots of people on the streets in England. And so it spoke about the need to ensure that every common prostitute wandering in public streets or public highways or in any place of public resort and behaving in a riotous or indecent manner could be restrained. When you look at some of our laws in the region, that phrase, common prostitute, is still used. It doesn't speak about a person. It's a common prostitute. And that starts some of the stigma of how we view people. So what Miriam faces is this. I'm not going to name countries because it's not about name and shame. But on the statutes of more than one country in this region, there is a law under the Sexual Offences Act that speaks to being a common prostitute or of known immoral character. These are things we need to change. Because we have a series of laws that come from another time and another place that do not speak to where we are today. But she also faces this. Now, when you speak to Miriam, one of the interesting things is she analyzes, and she's heading up a network of sex workers. She's based in Guyana. What are the things that actually happen, and how are these laws used? These laws aren't used to protect her. They're used sometimes to round her up. And she says, you know what happens? Generally, it's on a Friday evening. They may see some people, and they'll round them up, lock them up for the weekend. Maybe he'll treat them. Maybe request sexual favors. Or use the phrase, you know, I could really lock you all up and send all this to jail. This puts her at a risk. This is what she faces. But she says the irony is, on a Friday they want to arrest me, but on Wednesday they were coming for services from the girls. I have to go and get them out. It's the same police who are her clients. But this doesn't help her. This stigmatizes, this allows for certain abuses. And I'll speak a bit more about Miriam and what needs to be done. The other person I want to speak about is Miriam and her entire group, again. Not many people are aware of the Georgetown Declaration on sex work, where a group of women and men sat down in July last year and came up with a declaration saying what they would do to help prevent the spread of HIV, how they're going to work together to improve the public's health, their health, and that of all citizens in the country. This is not a common prostitute. These are people who are exercising under constraints a moral citizenship and a sense of health and well-being for all Caribbean citizens. But let me speak about a dear friend of mine, Anthony. Anthony lives in Trinidad. Anthony is a gay man. And about 6 or 7 months ago, he called me in my office and said, just not feeling good, you know. Not feeling good. So I think I should go and get a checkup. Tell me the name of a doctor that I can go to. So I gave him a name of a doctor. And about 6 months ago, he discovered that he was not just HIV positive, but he was classified as having AIDS and had to start antiretroviral treatment. But Anthony is one of hundreds of men across this region. And what he faces is the stigma of being gay and the stigma of HIV. He's one of thousands of men across this region, all across this region. But the stigma that he faces, and depending on where you live within the Caribbean, there are certain laws in the books that the UN Secretary General has spoken about as being punitive laws that do not help in the fight against HIV, do not help in ensuring the public's health. But the law that he faces is the Buggery Act. And the 1861 Buggery Act is based on the Act from 1553 for the abominable crime. The difference over 300 years is simply that where there was the pains of death, now there was penal servitude. And on the books of many Caribbean countries, the descendants, I'll call them that, of the 1861 Act still exist. And the crimes can vary from life imprisonment to 25 years to 15 years. But what is the crime? In some countries, the act of anal sex is defined as anything, anal sex. In some cases, it says between two people of the same sex, and in others, it says man and woman. There's a variation. But we do not have any law on the book as such that prohibits vaginal sex or oral sex. We have decided that one type of sexual activity between consenting adults should be subject to penal codes. Now, when I work across the Caribbean, I don't see this in the French territories. I don't see it in the Dominican Republic. I don't see it in the Dutch territories. But this is one of the legacies of colonialism. And the law as worded, and the reasons for the law, come back to this. So, what else does he face? He says he's really glad that he was born in Trinidad, because under the current Immigration Act, he couldn't get in. Now, if you look at the Immigration Act that exists in the books in Trinidad, the last category here says of prohibited classes: prostitutes, homosexuals, or persons living off the earnings of those two. But he says he's much happier being a gay man than falling under the first category, which is persons who are idiots, imbeciles, feeble-minded persons suffering from dementia and insane and likely to be a charge on the public goods. He'd rather be gay than an imbecile. And I support him for that. But we have these laws on our books. Another prohibited class: dumb, blind, or otherwise physically defective. We've inherited a lot at independence. It's time for us to clean it up. Now, I want to speak about my friend niece. She's not really my niece, but when she saw me, these two ladies, one of them saw me, she looked at me, she saw the gray hair, and she said, "Uncle." So I decided I had to call her niece. There was no other option. She called me uncle. And these are two women who speak about what it is like in Trinidad to be HIV positive and seeking services. And I want you to listen to what it is they have to say.
Well, they have you in a group. Like, they put you in this bracket where you is nobody. This, like, you know, you go and make this baby, and this baby not going to live, or this baby going to be sick and infected and always in the hospital. The doctors, they are very nice ones you meet at times, and then at times you meet those who don't have anything uplifting to say. They will say, "So why you decide to have a child? Why didn't you abort the child? Or why didn't this? Or why didn't that?" Where they could at least tell you, well, you know, you should take your medication, try and eat healthy, try and drink fluids, try and keep your, you know, try to encourage you to do the right thing so that the pregnancy would be successful in the way that you want it to be, whereby the child would be born negative.
I remember when I went and I handed them the letter, and they attached this letter to your file, so they gave you a date to come back to join, to start clinic. And, you know, when I went back to join, you know, I was kind of like dreaded when they would call my name. The thing is about that is that where you are sitting is not very far from the other person that might hear or that kind of thing. And the nurse was talking kind of loudly, you know, that kind of way. Do you know the risks that you're taking, and, you know, this kind of thing. And you could see she had a kind of attitude about it. So it was really frightening. It was really, really, really frightening for me. But I remember wanting my baby to be healthy at all costs.
That's what happens to women, not all. That's what happens to some women across this region trying to find services. There is still a stigma. There's a stigma about HIV, there's a stigma about sex, there's a stigma about sexuality. What can we do? I think fundamentally we have to recognize that there are laws that can prevent people from accessing services. And the challenge is to see how do we change those so that it serves the public health and it serves the needs of those who are most excluded and most vulnerable in our societies. How do we do this? Now, that's a very difficult thing to do. But while we're waiting to make those changes, there are things that we can in fact do. We can train the judiciary, the police, and the army to understand how to deal with and work with excluded populations. We can train judges to look at the law in a different light and to see what allowances can be made so that they do not penalize people who need to be given the opportunities to be able to access health and to find ways to ensure that other members of their community can access health. We need to perhaps also, too, have much more discussion about equality. And what does equality mean in our societies now? What does it mean 46 years after independence or 50 years after independence within the Caribbean? How do we ensure that all Caribbean citizens are equal? But it's one thing to say to people, you need to be equal, we need to find services for you, we need to find the supports for you as you encounter issues with the law and with your rights. But we need to have a mechanism for redress. Where does someone go when they have a problem? One of the things that we in UNAIDS have launched and are working on is the Coalition for Social Justice. And that coalition, the idea of that coalition is to have a mechanism, a system, where people who have faced issues with their rights can find redress. Often these are poor people where the notion of going to the court system and the cost involved is such that it prevents them from seeking those services. What the coalition seeks to do is to be able to find those cases that can become the bricks and mortar cases for the region and provide that service for people free of cost. We have to adopt better prison policies. One of the issues with the buggery law that has really got us in trouble is that it's very difficult at times for the state to provide condoms in prison. Because, in fact, in some countries, it is going against the law. How does the state go against itself, even though they are aware that there is a public health imperative to do so? We need to look very closely at how we reform those policies and what changes need to feed back up. And we need, importantly, to support community groups. Community groups need to be able to speak out much more, and like my friend Miriam does, on behalf of sex workers, about the need to ensure that the rights of all citizens are, in fact, met and not in any way diminished. And, lastly, and I say this to Dean Critchlow, I'm glad you're here, we need to work more with religious groups. We need to work with all partners in the society to see how we move. But let me have a look and see where we are with HIV. Let's just see what we've done over the last decade. We've had an amazing decline from about 20,000 cases in 2001 to about 17,000 new infections. 20,000 new infections a year to 17,000. We've also had a decline in the number of deaths. From 2001, about 19,000, to now about 12,000 deaths. And that, the blue line there, very much reflects the changes in the access to treatment. And was spoken about earlier on today. The medicines that we have now are available to protect the life of the person living with HIV, but also to the lives of protect the transmission to their partners. And the new medications are 96% effective in preventing transmission from an HIV person to their partner. In medical science, this is one of the most amazing breakthroughs we've had for HIV. But overall, when you compare the two periods, we had across the Caribbean about 250,000 people living with HIV in 2001, but there was no treatment. Treatment didn't really hit the region until about 2002. Oops. And we had about 21,000 new cases a year. Where we are now is across the region, we've got about 1% prevalence across the entire Caribbean. There's variation in that. At one end, we have Cuba, where the official statistics say it's 0.1%. Belize, about 3%. Jamaica, about 1.7%. We have a variation in prevalence across the region. But the good news is the access to treatment. 48% of people now are accessing treatment. That's really an amazing statistic. The reverse is the depressing part. That means 52% of people who need it don't have it. That's the reverse of that statistic. And one of the successes that we've had, and you have it here in Barbados, is we're close in a lot of the English-speaking Caribbean to eliminating mother-to-child transmission. That is a fabulous success that we have. And it is something we need to recognize and applaud. The OECS region stands as being, and the OECS, and I include OECS and Barbados, as being the first sub-region in the world to be able to certify that it has eliminated mother-to-child transmission. There is a procedure that needs to be undergone, but the evidence is there that this sub-region stands as one of the first in the world to be able to do this. This is a result, this is a success, and it is because of the hard work of a lot of people on the ground to ensure that this has happened. But when we look at HIV, let's have a look. That's the Caribbean. Let's just look at where Barbados is. I think it's really interesting. You see in the early 80s, HIV cases, and then AIDS cases, and these are the deaths. And the cases keep going up. There we are, mid-90s, it's going up. But look, you're going to see, as more people be coming in for testing, programs expand. But then, as we keep going and the deaths are going up, there's a change that starts to occur. And that's around the time when Lady Mead opened. That's when access to treatment became available. And it has made a tremendous difference in the lives of people. That's what treatment can do. And it changes fundamentally how we viewed HIV as a death sentence, as something we were scared about, to now a condition that is treatable, manageable, and people live productive lives being HIV positive. That's the change. That's what treatment does. So in Barbados, in 2010, what we have is of about 135 cases a year. On average, say 10 cases a month. That's about 2, maybe 3 people a week become HIV positive. This week, there are probably 3 people, maybe 2, who are going to become HIV positive. They're probably not going to know. They're probably not going to know for a while, unless they're going to get tested every week. We've got to do something on our prevention to bring that down. But the one thing we need to look at when we speak about those 2 or 3s, where are they now? And there's a tool, let me call a modes of transmission study. It looks to really tell you, of the last 100 cases, where were they? This is Jamaica. Okay? And what you see here is about 1/3 of the cases are gay men. But think back. We have certain laws in the books that make it difficult for gay men to go seek services, to come out. And there's that stigma about being gay, about being HIV positive. But in Jamaica, that's 1/3. And that's Barbados. And that's from Lady Mead. Self-identified. That's about 1/3. And I will tell you, that is a pattern that is not germane to Jamaica or Barbados only. That is a pattern across the Caribbean. And when we start looking at money, we need to look very closely to see, are we investing to have prevention in those populations? And if not, what is preventing us from doing so? But let's just talk money for an instance. Sexy topic. And I can see that my mother likes that more. From 2001 to 2012, we've seen a massive increase in the resources to the region, external resources. Some of those, that figure, comes from the World Bank loans that Barbados has taken out. So we're looking at about 91 million starting, going all the way up to 1.6 billion. And this is how it started to come. We had the World Bank and the loans that countries took. You had the Global Fund for AIDS, which changed the picture entirely. Sorry about that. You had the US government program PEPFAR. But then something started to change. The Global Fund changed its eligibility criteria, making it much more difficult for middle-income and upper-middle-income countries to access those resources. And the World Bank started to close its MAP loans and said it was kind of, in a way, providing more technical service than offering these loans. And at the last end here in 2012, you see with the Global Fund, the renewals, it's called their phase 2. You've had a year and a half, you apply for continued funding. As the money got tighter, the Global Fund started to reject certain applications, some on technical grounds, but as the money got tighter, the criteria did also. So we're starting to see the countries in the region are losing the grants. So that's what we've received across the entire Caribbean over a space of 10 years, $1.6 billion. That's the low-end estimate. But there's an economic crisis. And part of the reason we're facing a problem is because of this. And if you look at the growth rates, you see a very interesting pattern. The South, which traditionally asks for the resources, is growing faster than the North. That's a reality. One of the fastest growing economies in the world is Ghana. It's not a donor. We all are aware of the European debt crisis. That's part of the reason why it's becoming difficult to get resources. The South is growing faster than the North in terms of economic growth rates. And this is our Caribbean economies. And what you see here basically is that around 2005-06, most of the economies in the region have started to decline. The economic growth has gone down. We don't have the resources we did before. But perhaps the most frightening thing for me is looking at the fiscal space. Now, if you look at what governments have as for expenditures, their main expenditures, wages, interest payments, which are high, and pensions, what remains is what they have to support everything, all of the programs. And what you see here is a very interesting line going from Jamaica, which is highly indebted, all the way down to the Bahamas. And those are the two countries that are indebted. If you've got 76% of your revenue taken up by expenditures that you cannot really reduce, you're in a very tight squeeze to finance all of your programs. But there is a way. We have less money available. That is a reality. That is a current reality of our work in HIV/AIDS. But it's going to affect every country slightly differently. Trinidad provides most of its resources for its AIDS program. On the other end, there is Guyana, which depends more on external resources. So it's not going to affect every country in the same way, depending on the resource base. That's the Dominican Republic. And if you look here, you see what its vulnerabilities are. A lot of its programs are funded by donors. 35% comes from donors for prevention. When the donors leave, those areas are vulnerable. That's Guyana. The main contributors there are PEPFAR and the Global Fund. But those are going to decline. That's a country that has more vulnerability. Now, I want to take you through a slight modeling example that we have. Take a country with about 1.7% prevalence. with about, say, 2 million people, and say 2,000 new cases a year. What are the options in this new financial environment to be able to make it? Now, if that country has 2,000 new infections, but it is able to get a decline in the number of new infections by, say, 2% until 2018, and then 1% every year thereafter, you see that there is a 43% difference between what would be the trajectory if there was a decline versus if HIV were to increase. Difference in the number of new infections. And that comes up also to a 33% difference in terms of the number of people not eligible for treatment. But bear in mind, someone becomes HIV positive, you're building up a repository of people who are going to need treatment over time. It's what I like to call in banking terms a treatment mortgage. You've got to pay for it, but it's just when. And under those two scenarios, the number of people who will become eligible for treatment is about a 10% difference. So more people become eligible for treatment depending on whether or not you're able to control the incidence and the prevalence of HIV. But in that country, at this point in time, there are 28,600 people living with HIV. If you have a decline, that number moves to the first figure, 34,400. If the prevalence doesn't move and stays the same, the incidence doesn't change, and stays the same, by 2030 they're facing 39,000 people living with HIV. And if the program slips and the incidence of HIV increases, we're speaking about 43,500 people living with HIV. There are huge differences between making a dent in HIV/AIDS, just going along the same way, or allowing it to slip. And what is the cost? There's a 17% difference in the cost of the HIV response if one doesn't, in this theoretical Caribbean country, make a difference. And why, when you look at that cost, you don't see it dropping instantly? Because if you've got a 43% difference in the number of new cases, why is it that the cost differential is just 17%? It's because HIV is a long-term commitment. Because the people who become HIV positive today are probably not going to turn up for 5 or maybe 7 years, and may not need treatment for that period in time. So as we build up this treatment mortgage, it takes a while for it to show up. So, a very sobering message. The prevention you do today is not a short-term remedy for the funding issues and problems, because you have built up a certain momentum already in terms of the number of people who are going to be needing the services. And treatment is a significant part of the cost. So how do we reduce the fiscal commitment? And what does that mean? If you think of it this way, if someone becomes HIV positive today, you know that there is a commitment into the future of resources for that person. That's what you have to pay. It's a fiscal commitment. And so at a national level, as you know these numbers, you say, it's more like, think of it like savings. You have your child born today, you say, in 18 years I want to send that child to school, let me start saving today. So you're putting away that money. You're blocking it away. You're not going down to Trinidad at Christmas to buy curtains because I'm saving for the child. But that household economics example is actually close to what happens in real life at a fiscal level. You're putting away, you have to allocate those resources. So how do we reduce the fiscal commitment? This top line there are the actual expenditures you got to pay. That's the cost of treating HIV/AIDS. But the green line is the cost of new infections. And that commitment goes down as less people come into the system. Think of it this way. It's the same education example. You have your 3 children. The first one, not too smart, you say, I have to pay. The second one, you say, so bright, I know they're going to win a scholarship, so I can reduce the amount I save, because that child is going to win the scholarship. So I don't have to save that money. That's the fiscal implication. It's less money having to be put away. And if you look at it in these 2 lines, this looks a little complicated. The top graph, the top part of the graph, is the cost, just the actual cost. But the bottom figures here show you on a commitment spending basis, this is the money you're putting away, the difference between keeping it, having a decline, keeping it constant, or HIV increasing. Should HIV increase, you have to commit more resources. Come back to the school example. You have your 3 children, and all of them not too smart, you have to pay more, because they're not getting a scholarship. You have 3 children, and all of them really bright. You have to perhaps say, I don't have to put that money away. That's what the state has to do with HIV. It has to start putting the money away for the future cost. There's a fiscal implication for HIV. And a reduction of the number of new cases saves the state from having to put that money away, money that it can allocate for other things, including maybe prevention, but also other things in the national need that it has to address. If prevention fails, it will cost us more. No escaping that one. How do we move forward? We need to know our epidemic. We need to know, as I said with the MOTs, where are the new cases and what are we doing? This is the Dominican Republic modes of transmission study. The same 1/3. This is how they spend their money. As 1% of the expenditure is going on men who have sex with men, and 16% on the general population. This is Trinidad and Tobago, 2002, 2009. The green is the general population, MARPS, the most at-risk populations, the sex workers, the men who have sex with men. 2% in 2002, 5% in 2009. Our allocation choices need to be better. We need to put more money where the epidemic is. But when we start speaking about knowing our epidemic, one of the most dangerous things for us, and this is where it comes back to what I had said earlier on about parents and children, is about dealing with young people's sexuality. This is the data from Barbados last year. The number of people who are sexually active under the age of 15, about 20%, 19, 20%. One of the most difficult things for us to do and to think through, how do we provide not only information, but the means for young people to be able to protect themselves? That's the difficult choice. When you speak to ministers of education and say, can you put machines that make condoms available to students, put them in bathrooms in the schools? No, we can't do that. Can't do that. That will encourage the children to become sexually active. Well, what the research globally has shown is that information doesn't make someone become sexually active. Information makes someone have the means to be able to protect themselves. How do you address this problem if the means to protect oneself is made more difficult? I'll tell you a story. When I was about 17, my mother doesn't know this. Oh, she's going to know it now, as somebody said. But there was a pharmacy up the road. So friends of mine said, you should go in there and get some condoms. I said, but you have to go and take them. I said, I don't come from a family that steals, so we can't do that. And my mother being a teacher, if I was caught stealing, my God. So a friend said he would go and he would do it, and he would give me some. But then the problem became where to put them. So I thought a lot about it, and I used to ride my bicycle to school. It's a racer, so it's got the handlebars up. So I thought, okay, what I'll do is I'd put them inside the handlebars of the bicycle. So stuff them down inside. Well, they went all the way inside, so you couldn't get them out. And frankly, they were of no use to me. But that is 1978. Okay? That's adolescence, my adolescence. We're in 2012. and the school I went to, sort of the Harrison College of Trinidad, you still can't talk about it. But in the 30 years since I've left that school, of my cohort, we've estimated, we have lost about, and I say my cohort, the year above, my year, the year below, about 15 boys. It was a boys' school of about 1,000. About 15 boys have died of AIDS that we know. And last year, a young boy at 16, whose father discovered that he was having an affair, or relationship actually, with another man, hanged himself. 16 years old. But you know what? What I cried about was that about 4 years after I left school in 1978, one of my classmates did the same thing. It hadn't changed. We hadn't changed the system about how we speak openly and honestly to young people about sex and sexuality. And that has to change if we need to make a dent in HIV. We need to become much more cost-effective. And how do you do this? Let me run you through a simple example. Assume you know that the national cost for preventing mother-to-child transmission is, say, $5,600. And this is a real case. There's a program in one country, costs that much a year to run. They had 50 women, and those 50 women did not pass on HIV to their child. This is real data from a Caribbean country. So, they saved really 5,600 by 50. So what was the benefit of the program? What was the net cost and the benefit? They basically saved $100,000. And if you divide that out by the 50, you see that that program really cost $2,000 per woman, as opposed to the national average of $5,600. That program, in one measure of effectiveness, was saving money. But what we also have is we have programs that cost $6,000. When we're looking at limited resources, we got to support more the ones that cost less and bring down the cost in the other ones. But what we don't have across most of this region is good data and information on how much it actually costs to prevent HIV in a gay man, in a commercial sex worker, mother-to-child transmission, or a young person. We have spent money with abandon. I'm going to say we've spent it with gay abandon. We have spent money with abandon. We need now to start looking much more closely at what we're getting for the dollars spent and spend money on the programs that are most cost-effective to give us the results we want. But at the end of all of this, Quo Vadis, where do we go from here? To some people, HIV is a health issue. To some people, it's about education and awareness. To some people, it's a legal issue. To others, it's a moral issue. In finance, it's a financial issue. It is all of those and more. To me, it comes back to a fabulous speech I read recently. It comes back to my stamp collection. HIV really and truly is about who we are as a people. It is about what Caribbean people are about. It is about are we our brother's keeper. It is about can we fight discrimination. It is about, as was said in 1987 here, the mirror image of ourselves. And when we look in the mirror, who are we? That's what HIV is. After 20 years of working in it, for me, it is about the mirror image of ourselves. And when I stand with all of my colleagues, I see hope in that mirror, because there's treatment available now for the last 10 years, and there's a Lady Mead clinic that provides it, that gives people life. I see determination to ensure that stigma and what Eric Williams called irrationalities do not allow us and do not pervade our public policies and do not have people like my friend Tony or Miriam or niece to feel excluded and not have the moral citizenship. When I look in that mirror, I see a Caribbean people who are proud, who fight against discrimination, who understand equality. When I look in that mirror, I see all of you. Thank you.
Dr. Messiah, you've answered all my questions. I had all the other interpretations that I had in my mind. You've surpassed each and every one of them. And again, ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a round of applause for an excellent presentation. As you spoke, Doctor, I am sure that with the cooperation of the Honorable Minister, that we have you back here in Barbados for another presentation, this time perhaps an evening setting where we can pack this wonderful hall. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your time to ask your questions, and we'll ask Dr. Messiah to come back to the podium. And we have some mics as well in the audience. At this point, though, I'm going to ask our co-collaborators, Mr. David Mears from the Open Campus, to give you a well-organized vote of thanks. Thank you. David Mears.
Just for the record, Carl, it is not that organized. But, Honorable Donville Innes, Minister of Health, Dr. Ernest Messiah, distinguished speaker for this afternoon, Senator Dean Critchlow, Deputy President of the Senate, Mr. Harold St. Codrington, Deputy Governor, Central Bank of Barbados, Dr. Joyce St. John, Dr. Anton Best, Dr. Ian Austin, Dr. Norma Bino, all the other doctors in the audience. Good afternoon. And it is my task simply to give you a little insight into the various parties that brought this entire event together. And I think it was a well-directed and very dynamic and informative session. And we need to give Dr. Messiah another round of applause for that, first and foremost. Again, I do share the sentiments with him that we need to get more effective and more to the point. We need to get to the youth where they are. We can't stand back or sit on the mountaintop and expect them to come to us. All right? Firstly, I would like to thank the Deputy Governor's Office and the Governor's Office of the Central Bank for providing these facilities for us and for coordinating it. More importantly, we would like to thank the Ministry of Health, Dr. Bino and her team for approaching us, Ms. Bino and her team for approaching us on this special occasion, because the Lady Mead Reference Unit is one of those unsung heroes out there. And we all know of the CIBC First Caribbean Unsung Heroes theme, but I think that more of their work needs to be publicized. And we don't need to wait again for 10th anniversary or 20th anniversary to do something like this. We need to be in the communities. We need to work with more stakeholder groups and get that message out there. But we want to thank the Lady Mead Reference Unit for allowing this to happen, especially. The management and staff of the Frank Cullimer Hall, the various actors that would have been involved in setting up for today, we want to thank them especially for making a smooth presentation. You, the public, for coming out and for being attentive, for being somber when you needed to, for being engaging when you needed to Dr. Messiah, and for the media for coming here to cover the event as well, because just a handful of the society really benefited today, but we really want this message to get out there to persons, so we're banking on the media to be timely with those publications. All right, at this time, I want to thank you once again for coming out. In July, we'll be having another one of these presentations, or you're in the community. And we urge you to look out there and keep out for the message. We will be coming at you again. So thank you again for coming out, and God bless.